Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer Parker, and today I am so thrilled to have a very special guest. She's coming on really to share kind of her own personal perspectives. I know on this show we have a lot of professional perspectives, so I'm always really grateful when somebody is willing to come on and talk about things more from a personal viewpoint. Her name is Lisa Hacking, and she is involved in, well, I'll let her introduce herself as far as kind of things that she's doing in her life. But one of the things that we had talked about recently is that she gave a presentation at a women's retreat in regards to female sexuality from a personal standpoint, and specifically coming from this position where Lisa herself felt like throughout a lot of her marriage and background didn't really understand a lot about sexuality or didn't enjoy some of the benefits of sexuality, such as orgasm, things of that nature, and how she kind of went through her own journey of self-exploration to reach a much better potential and able to embrace her sexuality in a totally different way. And the reason why I think this is an important interview is because I get these questions a lot from women, especially women who grow up in cultures or environments where there is a lot of, messaging around how sexuality should be, what types of sexuality are correct or not correct, and all of the issues that we have in general, whether in Mormonism or in kind of puritanical culture that put women in a position of gatekeeper of sexuality instead of ownership of sexuality. So I'm really excited to have this interview. So Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
I hope I represented all of that somewhat correctly as far as your viewpoint.
Yep, perfect.
Good. So why don't you just give us a little bit of your background and share as much or as little as you want to about where you come from and what you're doing and what you're about.
Okay. And when you were saying that, I thought that I needed to first have the disclosure that my husband was amazing and trying and doing everything in his willpower within his realm of my preconceived notions of what sex was supposed to look like to help me be educated and comfortable. And from the minute that we were married, he knew that I had some strange thoughts in my head that he wanted to help me alleviate just because of my Mormon upbringing and many young women's lessons that I had given and then in the years later taught, that he knew those were things that probably shouldn't be in there. So just a disclaimer for him, he was amazing.
Right. So in other words, you're wanting to make sure, because there are obviously partners who are not as caring or concerned about their wives' pleasures. We're talking about heterosexual marriages here, but you're saying, no, that wasn't the case for me. It wasn't that he wasn't willing to take the time or wasn't concerned about my pleasure. It was really some sexual baggage or hangups I was coming to the relationship with.
Exactly. And he knew I was coming with those, and he was trying to help me work past those.
And he was from LDS background as well, I'm assuming?
Yes, he was.
All right. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? What was your upbringing like? How do you come to be, growing up as a Mormon young woman, etc.?
I grew up in a home where we didn't talk about difficult situations, and especially sex being one of them. Even when I had my period, I didn't feel comfortable talking to my mom about it. She had some pads under the counter that I knew, we call them lady things. So I knew that's probably what I needed, but it was my sister finally said, hey, here's a tampon. Let me show you how it works. And that was it. We didn't talk about this was going to come. It was really sadly, but it was up to the 5th grade maturation class that I had that I learned how to take care of that. And no blame to her, because I'm sure that in her family, this was not talked about either. And it's just uncomfortable things to talk about. So definitely when it was time to talk about sex, that conversation didn't happen at all. The only thing that I had ever heard my parents say, and my parents were very, very loving. They would kiss in front. I knew that they loved each other, but just that subject wasn't talked about. The only thing I ever heard my parents say is once I said, so is there anything you can't do when you get married? And then that was in the time of the oral sex is bad. And I'm like, oh yeah, gross. Who would even want to do that anyway? So that was programmed pretty early in my head that wasn't acceptable.
That was a question that you actually asked your parents, and they actually talked about oral sex?
Well, the question was, once you get married, is there anything you can't do? Because I was trying to find the boundary of, like, I know what I can't do now, but after I'm married, are there things I can't do? And that was one thing I can't do.
And what age were you about when you asked that question?
It would have been 15.
Wow. Okay. All right. So it seems to me like that was a pretty brave question for you to ask, given the context you just gave, where you don't really talk about these things to begin with.
It was, but I didn't realize that would be such a, like, I'm thinking, I don't know what I was thinking, but not anything that graphic. And so, of course, when she told that to me, that went right to my disgust. Yeah, that is disgusting. I can see it on her face. She's bold enough to tell me that. Yes, that is something you won't do. And I think it's right about that time that the letter came out that said you shouldn't do it. And it was a very short time and then the letter was redacted, or whatever it was in the handbook or whatever. But I don't think my parents ever got that it was redacted.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately a very common scenario given that time frame and that age group of people that were affected by that.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead as far as just maybe some of the messages then that you got from Young Women's or other ways that you learned about sexuality.
So just from Young Women's, I was pretty sure that I knew the rules, and For the Strength of Youth pamphlet had just been barely started to talk about during that time. And I knew that I didn't touch myself. That was bad. I didn't have any remembrance of anybody asking me specifically if I did, and that was bad or good. I just knew that I was not supposed to do that. And then I had time that was like a little bit of a wilder time, which really was nothing. But I had a friend that was a little on the wilder side, and she had like a teen magazine, and it had something about sex, or maybe it was even bikinis. I don't know, but it really made me feel uncomfortable. And I knew that I probably shouldn't invite her to any more parties at my house because it made me feel uncomfortable. And I knew that I had crossed the line, or she had crossed the line, and that wasn't anything to talk about. So basically I didn't even learn things that most kids learn as teenagers, like this is what you do. I did make out with a few boys, always felt guilty afterwards, but it was always only kissing, absolutely no touching anything, but definitely a lot of guilt after. Then Paul and I started dating when we were young too. So that started a whole new realm of guilt.
So there was guilt just about kissing, even though there was nothing else that was happening for you.
Yeah. I would feel bad. When Paul and I got pretty close before his mission, I was aggressive, and he talks about it now, and he's the one that was holding back, and I was the aggressive one and did things that definitely no intercourse, but there was some heavy petting, and always I would be the one to put his hand, and he was like, no, we can't do this. And then finally one talk with my sister when she told me, Lisa, like, he's not going to let him do anything to you. And I knew that she just, from previous experience, she had been there too. So she knew what was happening. And so we would make out one night, and then I would turn to him and say, Paul, are you going to respect me in the morning? And be like, yes, I'll respect you in the morning. And then we'd just keep going. But we always knew the line to cross. There was no, and this was before the bar was raised, so he could still go on his mission as long as we hadn't done X, but Y with just the upper part of the body was okay.
Okay. And so, as is pretty typical, you're kind of presenting a conflicted stance, right? On the one hand, you're very innocent, naive, worried, guilty for things that are fairly typical. And then on the other hand, there's this part of you that's like aroused and excited and enjoying the pleasure of being with this boyfriend who ends up being your husband, right? So
yep.
What do you think that was like for you, kind of coming at it from those two perspectives of trying to be the good girl, trying to be respectable, but then also very much enjoying this pleasure?
Guilt probably won out because we spent several trips to the bishop's office, him going to talk to his bishop, me going to talk to mine. I confessed to, and he told me that I should read The Spiritual Roots of Human Relationships by Stephen R. Covey. And this book was so over my head. I felt as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, like, I don't even know what he's talking about. And he also told me that I should never see Paul again. So that was really tough. And then during that time also, my dad was the bishop. And so I strongly remember walking down to my dad's shop and exactly where I was standing when I had to tell my dad that, yeah, guess what? Paul's touched my boobs, and just how humiliating that was to have to tell my dad that.
Wow, that brings up a whole nother issue, which is really kind of unrelated to our topic today, but the issues of boundaries within Mormonism, right? So that it's already an issue that we have this idea of confessionals to the ecclesiastical leader, but when there's dual relationships where the ecclesiastical leader is also a family member or a good friend or a neighbor, and now they know very personal aspects about your sexual life, that's really problematic.
Yeah, it was. Paul's bishop was really good. He told him, you've had a bite of the candy bar. It's really hard now to keep the rest of the candy bar in the package, but you're just about ready to go on your mission. So just wrap back up that Snickers bar and you can have it when you get home. So luckily that's what we did, and he was able to go on his mission.
And in the meantime, you're being told to cut off this relationship that really means a lot to you. Like, I'm guessing you are falling in love with Paul and you're having an emotional connection to him, and this is part of why you're also exploring sexually with him, but you're being told you shouldn't even have that connection at all. You should just break it off.
Yeah.
Which really interferes with emotional development, right, of attachments and relationships, and teaching kids how to lean into those commitments instead of leaning out of them.
Right.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So Paul goes on his mission. Then what happens for you?
So when he got home from his mission, so I dated a few times, but when he got home from his mission, he was during the time when it was 18 months and he had the choice whether to extend. And so he stayed the extra 6 months. So he stayed 2 years. And so I kind of went a little rebellious on him. So I did date a little more during that 6 months period. But when he got home from his mission, we were married 6 weeks later. So it all worked out.
It all worked out. Okay. All right. So you enter your marriage with what kinds of, trying to, channel that younger version of yourself. I'm guessing you're 19, 20 years old, somewhere around there?
Yep. I was 19.
Okay, so are you excited about having the candy wrapper come off, or?
Yes. It's a good thing that we got married because, we picked up off right when he got home. We picked right where we had left off, and we got married quick for that reason. Sex alone. We could have waited, which would have done no good. it would have just been worse. So the faster we got married, the better, so that we could finish the candy wrapper. And it was great. We had 2 years of amazing sex, just like any newlywed. It was amazing for me. Paul knew what he was doing. His mom had actually prepared him a lot better than I had been prepared. And he was a great patient teacher. The problems of started my period, didn't plan that very well, but he was patient and kind, and he would tell me things that were happening to my body to make me feel like it's okay, I'm not weird, nothing, like this is what a girl's body does. Really educated me and tried to help me have the best sexual experience that I possibly could.
And so, I mean, it's just so you know, and just to kind of try to include some of the other stories that I've heard, not everybody does have a good first few years of sexuality. There's a lot of couples that right off the bat, because they're maybe unprepared, or some of these messages that you talked about earlier kind of interfere with even honeymoon sex, even though both are maybe excited or anticipating a good time. So it sounds like, at least for you and Paul, the first few years went well. And what do you mean by that? Like, what does that mean for your sex life to be going well at that particular time?
Yeah, that's a really good point. In my brain at that time, it was okay. It was good. We didn't have kids yet. I still had this passion of the making out that I had when we were teenagers, but now we could take that passion to the next level. I didn't know a lot. Paul did, trying to do new things, try new things, but we really didn't need to, because we could both orgasm. At that time, we were good in missionary position. Like, that's my idea of what it was supposed to look like, but it didn't end up looking exactly like that, but it wasn't failure. It was okay. In my head, perfect sex looked like missionary style, orgasm at the same time. And in those passionate couple of years, it happened once in a while, usually did, but we had been wanting this. We dated, so plus his mission, and then 2 years before, it had been a long time that we were waiting to get to where we could finally have sex, like the real thing.
That's
so
a lot of foreplay.
yes, 5 years of foreplay. So it was good. He realized right off the bat, like, I didn't know my body. And he was trying to help me and educate me, but he would say, what about this position? What about this? And I really didn't know my body. So I had one kid, and sex got a little bit worse after that. And by the time I had the next kid, this is when I really noticed that Paul all along had thought that it's got to be better than this. There's something not right. It's better than this. But finally, I dared talk to somebody about it. So at the 6-week checkup of my second child, I said to the OBGYN who had just delivered my baby, and I was scared to death, but I said to him, could you show me where my clitoris is? Like, I didn't even know where it was. And I knew it was a cool thing, and I should be okay with it, but I would get so scared touching myself, because that's not something you do. I was okay if Paul would touch me, but I could not touch myself. So Paul would say, is it here? Is it here? Is it this? The book says it should be this. And I think that it was just so much fear that I couldn't let my body relax and enjoy and really find out which one it was, which thing. I don't know why, but at that time, I didn't know where it was. I think the gynecologist, he was not helpful at all. And he told me to get a book at the library or something, like totally wrote me off, did not answer the question, did not help me out, was not empathetic at all of, oh, you poor girl, you're married all these years and don't even know where your clitoris is. Like, none of that. But I don't know. I can't blame him because really, like, he's not the one that should be telling me that, but he could have been more helpful. But anyway, it was enough for me to be embarrassed enough that I didn't dare ask anybody else or get any other help.
I think that's actually pretty horrific that a doctor can't point out an anatomical part of your body.
Right. I don't know why. Anyway, so I came home and Paul was so hopeful that I could figure this out and sex would be better for me once I talked to the doctor about it, and it wasn't. So he set out to help me, buy me tools, and he bought a vibrator, which I didn't even know what that was, that it existed, anything about that. And I let him bring it to bed with us one time, and it felt foreign to me and should have helped, but because I was so afraid of it, it didn't help much. And so I put it up in the top of the closet, hid it from the kids. I just died that anyone would know that it was there. And a couple of other times he asked if we could get it out, and it was just too scary for me. Like, this is not a natural thing. We should be able to do this just by ourselves. And I remember the day that I threw that away, I put it in the trash right before I knew the trash man was going to come. And I just watched him dump that trash up into the trash can. So I knew it would be gone, because I was so ashamed to have that in the house. And then that just began. By the time I had my fourth kid, I was barely having orgasms once in a while. And then after the last kid, maybe a couple of times. And then 13 years where I would try so hard. I would just pray and pray and pray, help me to have an orgasm, help me to have an orgasm. I know this should feel good. I know that Paul would enjoy it better, and I know that sex should be good, but it just didn't come.
So one question I have for you is, here you have this husband who's very well-meaning and trying to be helpful and, offering you resources and tools. So even though that all comes from a very well-meaning place, did that start feeling like pressure, or like there was something wrong with you? Like, was there a negative side for that for you as well, even though it kind of came from this positive space?
I could see that it was hard for him too, and that really I wasn't giving him what he needed. And he was patient, and he would just get to where he's like, Lise, I got to do this. This is the male need, and I've got to. And so I would, but then on the other hand, I would feel guilty now because it should be good and beautiful, and I was making it a chore. And so that was damaging our relationship in that way, but never was it him forcing himself upon me or me resenting that in any way. I knew he was just trying to be helpful, but it was so messed up in my head because this shouldn't be like this. And then we could only so missionary style was the one position in my head that I could think of as the correct position. But finally, he convinced me that maybe some other ways would be better for orgasm. But then we would try things and it would hurt. It was very, very painful. And he knew that that position should not be painful. But because it hurt, he would go back to missionary, and then that didn't do much for me. And the other positions that should have been good for me hurt. So we were like that for the 13 years.
And you didn't understand why you were having this type of genital pain. Do you understand now? Do you think it was just a matter of not having sufficient arousal, or was there a problem that you were having?
What I didn't understand is sex couldn't hurt because it didn't hurt in this position, but it did hurt in this position. But finally, once I had gone in for my yearly pap smear, And one of the doctors have said, you have a tilted uterus. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? It's like served me well. I have 4 kids, so obviously it works. I didn't realize that it had another purpose. And then I went in one more time. A friend of mine had a hysterectomy, and it was very successful. She didn't have any like the hormone stuff with it. And so I went in to get a hysterectomy, and he asked me if sex was painful. And I said, yeah, in certain positions. And then I was a medical coder at that time. And I noticed when my chart came through, like the reason they gave for my hysterectomy was painful sex. And that's when it first clued into me of, holy cow, this might help.
Like there's something actually anatomical here that's going on that I never even knew about for so long in my life.
Yeah. So maybe I could have had orgasms before the hysterectomy if I would have tried other things, which I know now would have helped. So maybe it's not just all the hysterectomy, but it was also after the hysterectomy that it did start to feel better. And Paul bought another vibrator and brought it home. And I was like, I think this could feel good. And so more open to that. And that's when it started getting better.
And before we even get there, I mean, there's obviously lots of other ways to have orgasm and sexual pleasure without, penis and vagina sex. Are you saying that what hindered the two of you from exploring some of those things are these perceptions you had about the right kind of sex? Like, we're only supposed to have sex in these particular ways. So oral sex or, manual stimulation or self-stimulation were not ways that you were really comfortable exploring yourself.
Right. Exactly. Like there is no way I would still touch myself. Even like then, if we used a vibrator, Paul had to hold the vibrator. And then I would say more to the left, more to the right. Like it was okay if he was doing it, but if I did it, then it was masturbation and that was wrong.
Right. Even though he was in the room with you, or even though he was still very much present, you still had those ideas about what was meant for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so somehow I must have got the idea that even married masturbation is wrong.
Right. So, gosh, there's so many different directions we could go, right? But
messed up.
So how do you, I guess I just want to talk briefly about this tension, right, that the two of you had, like, because again, I just want to make room for other people's stories as well as they're listening, is that, when you're in a monogamous marriage and the expectation is that sexuality really can only happen if the two of us are involved in a very specific way, like you're mentioning. So there really isn't maybe room for solo masturbation, or there isn't room for solo fantasy or even erotic materials, used in a solo way. Then what your husband is coming at you with in his own feelings is like, I've got this sexual drive that's going on. I've got these sexual, feelings, and you're the person that I'm supposed to figure that out with, right?
Right.
And you are kind of, part of you kind of intellectually gets that, but then you're having also genital pain and you're not necessarily always enjoying things, or you're starting to feel this pressure, like maybe there's something wrong with me. Just you did such a good job kind of just painting the picture of anxiety, like praying to the Lord, like, help me, please let me have an orgasm. And so I can sense just the anxiety in your body language or in your face, as you would be in that position of praying for that. And we know, obviously that anxiety and sexual pleasure they don't get along very well. Right? And so it's kind of like, almost like we're creating bigger problems than necessarily need to be there, just because I think of some of these scripts and narratives and expectations. And do you want to talk a little bit about how, the next part that I really want to delve into, so how do you start challenging some of these ideas? How do you start opening up to new ways of like, okay, maybe now the vibrator is something I'm willing to consider versus before it felt like this unnatural thing that we shouldn't, quote unquote, shouldn't need.
And I have to go back when I was describing the hard times. I would feel like if finally I ever did have an orgasm in that first, like I went years without, but then Paul would feel like such a success. And when I didn't, he would feel like he was such a loser, like he couldn't bring his wife to orgasm. So it was affecting him too. Mm-hmm. And that part of it just makes me so sad that he had that pressure when he couldn't even feel what my body was feeling, but he had that pressure. So back to how I finally let a vibrator is after my hysterectomy and I had my healing time, it felt different. Different positions felt different. The whole thing felt different.
Meaning more positive for you. Like there was something better about it for you.
Yes.
Which again is not everybody's experience with a hysterectomy. You know, some women feel like it totally shuts down their desire, or some women find sex uncomfortable after a hysterectomy. Some, like you're saying, have the opposite. So these are all very personal stories that people just need to be aware that things can affect them differently.
Yeah, I love that. And I had no idea that there were books out there available to read. And I'm not I think I say I'm not sure if I would have even looked at them, but I think if they would have been something that I was comfortable with. I do remember there was, I can't think of their names, but two Mormon brothers that are doctors. I don't think they're even like medical doctors, but they put out Brent somebody, but they put out a book. And it was something more affirming towards sexual stuff that I gave to my daughter when she got married. I thought that was a good resource because it was more open and talked about things a little bit more than I had. But even with her, I didn't give her the tools and the help that she needed at that time. But it wasn't until I started finding there's resources, and knowledge is power. And I need to learn about this, that things started to really change.
So were you able to do that within the context of your Mormonism then? In other words, we do have messages within Mormonism that do talk about educating ourselves, right? And knowledge. And I mean, there's quite a bit of, I think, Mormon narrative that can support that type of thing, right? Of educating yourself.
Yeah. And I wish I would have, but it wasn't until I could take everything off of I call it the Mormon grooves I had that were making me judge, because I judged people in their dress. I judged sex. So, and when those fell off for me, I was better able to say, hey, I'm open to anything, and I need to learn all there is and then decide for myself, not based on what someone else told me.
Okay, so it sounds like you're going through some type of shift just in general then, like looking at your faith differently, looking at your sexuality differently, kind of reevaluating some of the narratives that you had, not just in not just the scripts that you had about how to be a good sexual person, but what does modesty mean? How do I judge other people? How do I make assumptions about the world around me?
Yes. And so to open that up and say, wow, I now can explore my body. I was reading for the very first time, Come As You Are, which you recommended. And seriously, it was one of your podcasts that you talked about that kind of gave me permission that it was okay to start exploring and learning. And then from there, I've just exploded because I realized that there's so much out there that that's been kept from me because of my own ideas of what was right and wrong, that now I have so much to learn. So as I read Come As You Are, and having her just say, okay, stop right now and get a mirror and do this and do whatever she talks about, that is the first time in my whole life I had got a mirror and looked to see what was down there.
Wow, that's really cool.
Thanks for saying cool and not sad.
Well, I think that is cool. I don't think that a lot of women are taught to really prioritize that type of self-exploration, even outside of Mormonism necessarily, right? I don't know that that's a common thing that we're encouraged to do, is to get to know ourselves in that way.
And when you interviewed her too, to hear you say that you learned stuff, I thought, oh my word, that's so exciting, because if Natasha's still learning stuff, look at all the new things I can learn.
Right.
Because there was one stage that I thought, okay, this is as good as it gets. Like, this is what it's going to be forever. And now to know that, like, there are so many things we haven't tried or done, that when we're tired of this and when this is like lost its nostalgia, then we can move to something else. That's exciting to me.
So seeing it kind of like a sexual journey that you're on now with your husband that always has new opportunities or possibilities associated with it.
Yep, exactly. I remember once when I was a little more open-minded, probably after the vibrator, after the hysterectomy, after the first vibrator, and having him say, or I just wanted to be more open, and I said, so what sexual fantasies do you have? I'm ready. I want to like open and explore and do all these things. And I remember he told me like one little thing, but I wasn't at that point even ready to hear stuff that he really thought was a sexual fantasy that he was ready for. But he patiently waited and let me learn and let me grow and opened my mind up. And then also, I love when you talk about that disgust is on a vertical scale, and like some people's disgust is high, some is low. And like truly my level of disgust, which that's a bad word for it, but my level of things that I'm open to is growing. And it's not because they're bad or good. It's because my mind is opening and I'm learning. And for me, that's going to work for me. I like that. That's going to work.
Right. Well, I go back to kind of that example when you're 15 and your mother's telling you that oral sex is, not as kind of gross and bad. And I think I would have probably thought that at 15 too. I mean, I thought French kissing sounded gross, right?
Right.
When I was about 10. So the disgust factor is a normal one whenever we're kind of hit up with new information that we've never been privy to before. And for some people that continues, that's something that stays kind of like a fixed thing, that's probably not something that's ever going to turn me on, or that I'm going to find that erotic. And yet for many, many things, those things shift and they're more fluid, right? So as you try something, or as you have a partner who invites you to something new, then all of a sudden something that maybe once you didn't have high regard on, you find kind of arousing or exciting. So yeah, it's interesting to see how we shift and change over a lifetime.
Which I think is really cool, because to me, it will never get boring, because there's always more stuff we can learn, more. If we're in a slump and haven't been excited about each other for a while, then hey, it's time that we learn something new and figure something else out to make it exciting again.
Right. Well, so I'm a big proponent of, by the fruits you shall know them, right? So I think that's a great principle to live by. And so it sounds to me like what you're saying throughout this whole thing is that having very rigid kind of unqualified ways that came from an outside authority as to how you would live your sexual life ended up not giving you a lot of great fruit, right? So that you felt sexually repressed, sexually anxious, that there was not as much pleasure as you were hoping to have with a man that it sounds like you had a really good relationship with, right? And really enjoy.
Yes.
And on top of it, you had some anatomical issues too that complicated things because, yeah, tilted uterus, it will be. There are positions that are painful for women who have a tilted uterus. Well, the uterus
it does tilt your universe.
Yes, it is its own universe. But especially for penis penetration, right? So can you talk a little bit about, I mean, it sounds like you're saying, one, you finally got some answers that were important for you to have anatomically, which it's really, I think, a sad commentary on our medical field and world that it took so long for you to get correct diagnosis, right, from your OBGYNs that didn't, either notice that or talk to you about those things or weren't willing to educate you.
Yes.
You were able to get correct diagnosis and have some medical procedures that were helpful for you. But then really this other aspect, which sounds like the bigger aspect, is shifting some of that rigidity, becoming more flexible, opening up yourself to new possibilities, claiming your own authority with your husband as to what was going to work sexually for the two of you and for you personally. So do you want to talk a little bit about what have been the fruits of that? What are the benefits of you having been willing to step into that space that I'm sure at first was maybe a little scary?
And I like how you said claiming my own authority, because that also took the pressure off of Paul. He was trying so hard to make me have a good sexual experience that's a lot of pressure for a guy. And when I claimed that authority and took charge of what works for me, what doesn't work for me, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, I'm going to try this new toy, I'm going to try this or this, he finally can enjoy it knowing that I'm getting the fulfillment too. So kudos to him for sticking with me. And now the reward is that he doesn't have that pressure to fulfill me sexually.
Right. So it is kind of like the sword with two sides, right? Like on the one hand, we do want partners to be concerned about sexual pleasure and what's my partner experiencing, and am I being a considerate lover, right? And am I making sure that both of our needs are being, are on the table, right? And on the other hand, and I see this a lot with what I think Mormon men in particular are given a lot of guidance about being good husbands and being responsible for the consideration of their partners. And so it almost feels like its own pressure, like, are you having a good time, baby? Are you okay?
Yes.
Are you having an orgasm?
Yes.
And then it's almost like, the female side of that can be like, oh my gosh, if you care so much about my orgasm, that in of itself is a problem.
Yes.
Like now I'm having anxiety about your anxiety that I'm not having orgasms.
Because you won't have success unless I have an orgasm.
Exactly. So then it really becomes more about the male partner too, right? And that's very unintentional. Like, I mean, I think it comes from a really well-meaning, loving space. But
definitely. Yes.
Right. So when we are able to take more ownership for ourselves in conjunction with being considerate partners, then hopefully that pressure comes off. And then we don't have these these definitions of what it means to be a successful lover, right? Or to have a successful sexual encounter. And our culture is very orgasm centric. It's very penis centric, and so we have some of these messages that it's hard for all of us to feel like, well, did we really have a good time if it didn't include this or that? Or
yes, so true. That's it.
Right.
I feel like another thing that has been just a huge change for me is, and this is like totally off the subject, but it affected my sex life, is we have a gay kid, And he came out like when he was 18, that's like 3 years ago. And right before that, we had a friend say, stay out of the bedroom. Like gay people, like stay out of the bedroom, stay out of the bedroom of your heterosexual friends. Just don't let your thoughts go in the bedroom. And he said, do you want to go in your mom and dad's bedroom? And that was like ding, 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 ding for me. Like, yes, what I do in my bedroom is me and Paul. It includes no one else. If Paul and I are comfortable with what's happening in there, we're great. And I don't want to be in anybody else's bedroom. And to me, that kind of like even released another layer of, between Paul and I, we can do whatever we want.
Right. Yeah, and we do have precedents for this. In the bishop's handbook, there's a nice little paragraph that says something along the lines of, when bishops are kind of being guided to how to counsel with married couples, right? Married heterosexual couples. And it does say, that those decisions are kind of up to the couple. Now, the caveat to that is that there's three, I think, words, if I remember them correctly. One is, that people shouldn't be doing anything coercive or abusive, which I agree with. That's
yes.
And I think that can definitely fall under an ecclesiastical mantle, to talk about those things. But then there's like these words that are much more subjective, which are like unholy or impure. And who gets to decide what's unholy? And this is, going back to the issue around oral sex and how there was a letter that came out about that in the 80s. And then the church kind of didn't stand by that much longer than I think 6 months. Who gets to decide, what is an unholy or impure practice? And I think that's where I find a lot of the issues is people either have their parents or their bishops or their friends or their own mythologies kind of make those decisions for them instead of really thinking about it from the perspective of, is this something that edifies our relationship? Is this something that draws us closer versus is this something that is causing a problem between us some way? And when you look at it from that perspective, it shouldn't really matter what the topic is, because I can guarantee you that there's missionary style position that is coercive in married couples, right? There's very vanilla sex that is coercive and that's abusive in a married heterosexual couple. That happens a lot. So, but we don't normally see in the culture going, well, vanilla missionary style position sex is unholy, right? No, it's how it's being used. It's being used in an unholy way. But then with other things, we're very quick to just deem those behaviors unholy, like masturbation, like oral sex, like anal sex, like certain positions, like certain fantasy play or fantasy thought, or even erotic materials or sex toys, right? Like those are all things that come under these umbrella terms of unholy or impure or unnatural that really are very, very subjective.
Yes. Because a vibrator is not natural. That is a man-made thing. And that's where my head went the first time, is this is unnatural.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of times unnatural in religious cultures has been used to deem anything that won't include procreation. And why we have so much focus on penis and vagina sex, but to your point, penis and vagina sex, especially in missionary style position, is not a very reliable way to achieve female orgasm.
Right.
And so that's a problem, right? So if you're wanting to procreate, well, then that's one type of a goal. But if you're wanting to experience sexual pleasure and bonding and orgasm as a couple, that is more of an emotional goal, that can have all different kinds of ways that you achieve that.
Yep. Right.
And it's interesting too, for me, how the unnatural thing really falls short for me, because I don't know, we're all driving like these unnatural steel machines that didn't just show up. We're all taking unnatural medicines that help us, live a lot longer. It didn't just, grow on a tree.
Yes.
We are so good at taking advantage of so much technology. And in fact, we even have a narrative for that within the church where we say, aren't we blessed that we live in a time when, we have been blessed with the technology or the human evolution or development, that we've reached these types of goals, right, as a human race. And we fit that into the Mormon narrative, right? When we praise the divine, as we hold the divine somewhat accountable for that, like we're being blessed in that way.
Yes.
Then when it comes to these other things, all of a sudden, so my car, that's an okay, unnatural thing, but this vibrator that helps me orgasm, much more reliable, that's not a natural thing, right? So
right.
It's interesting how we kind of justify these ways that we make exceptions.
Yes, so true, because I would have never dared. Yes.
Yeah. Any other thoughts as far as benefits that you've reaped the rewards of, just even personally, like, because I know you talked a lot about you and your husband in the bedroom, but I think you've also talked a little bit about self-exploration and getting to know yourself better. Are there individual benefits as well?
Yes. So kind of that's one thing with my friends that I deal with, is why I'm always end up talking about this and teaching this, is because not all of them are married. Not all of them have a great husband like I do, who's willing to help me out. And so just talking to them about the ownership that they take of their body, their pleasure, whatever it is that they need to help them. We only get this body for so long. We're 20, but now, sorry, we're 50, we're 60 when our minds have been enlightened like this. And so we need to take advantage the very best we can and get the very most out of our bodies that we can. I loved an article that you linked to called Masturbation for Medicine is Medicine. And in part of my class that I teach, I talk to them about there's some real benefits of helping you get to sleep at night, some things that you can look at and just reframe your thinking so that you're not thinking, okay, this is bad or dirty and I'm getting past that. No, you're using this as, I'm hurting right now. This is going to help take me to a different place, make my body feel good, and rejuvenate me to face what I'm having to face, or to get to sleep tonight because a lot's on my mind. Whatever it is, just trying to get them to be okay with using this fabulous body that they have and being proud of the body that they have. I really am into, if you have a chance to wear a bikini, wear the bikini. If it feels comfortable for you and you want to do it, if you don't want to do it, then don't. But if you want to do it, but it's just because of your grooves that you have in your head that are stopping you from doing this, then maybe try a little to push past that, because our bodies aren't getting any better. We are only aging. So do it now while it's as good as it is, whether it's wear the bikini, wear the cute little outfit that brings you pleasure, that makes you feel like you're sexy. Whatever it is that's making that, don't deny that, like embrace that. And then if it does make you feel sexy and you're feeling a little turned on, take it to the next level. That is so cool as a woman that you can do that.
I love hearing you feel and sound so empowered about all of that. I think that it is kind of going back to the metaphors of how we have these weird ways of thinking of what is okay or what isn't. It's very typical for us to take antidepressants and feel like that's perfectly in the okay when it comes to being a righteous Mormon woman, right? Or to take a sleeping pill, or to take whatever type of medicine there is that can help with some of these symptoms that we have. And then yet if we think about masturbation as a way to help us cope, then all of a sudden we're thinking that we're dependent on something incorrectly, right? Or that we're an addict somehow or something along those lines. And here, from my perspective and coming at it from a Mormon narrative, like here's this like self-regulating system that it's within us, that if we're going to believe that we come from a divine creator, like what an amazing self-regulating system that's just right there for us to take advantage of, and that isn't dependent on our relational status or on our relational quality, because marital sex and marital pleasure and marital orgasm all comes with wonderful benefits as well. And yet it is dependent on a lot of things that may be outside of your control, such as the quality of your current relationship, or whether or not you're even married, right? Or whether or not you're a widow or divorced, or whether or not you're in a particular time frame in your life, like you're an adolescent, and you don't want to be married yet. And yet we have this self-regulating way of being able to manage our sex drive and our sexual fantasies in a way that helps so much with medical benefits, emotional benefits, lowers stress, lowers pain, and yet we're much more willing to take a pill than to be willing to reframe some of our thoughts about masturbation. So not to shame pills, because pills are oftentimes a very necessary part of life as well, as far as enhancing quality of life. But I'm just saying why one is okay and one isn't.
Yep.
Yeah.
And here's another tool in your toolbox.
Right. It's not like an either or.
Yep.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Well, so it sounds like you feel really good about where you're currently at. It sounds like, are you proud of yourself? I'm proud of you.
I am. And I also realize that I have so much to learn. And that excites me too.
It's been so much fun to just hear you talk. And I hope that people can really resonate with some of your story. I think many of us, if not most of us, grew up with some type of sex negative messaging, even if we came from families that talked about sex more often. I don't know how in our current culture, and I'm not just talking about Mormon culture, you don't grow up with some negative sexual messaging, right? Whether it's the media or it's expectations from the culture, or even inappropriate religious messaging that can be shaming of normative sexual development. There's so much that I think we're all navigating this world of sexual messages that we all grew up with. It's just really phenomenal to see someone like you be able to become more self-aware, be able to challenge some of your own thinking, be willing to try new things, be willing to practice new things, and then reap the rewards, not only in your marital life, but also in your own, it sounds like, individual self-esteem and the way that you portray yourself and feel in your sensuality and your sexuality as a woman.
Yep. All the above.
Yeah. So
any chance I get with my friends, I know it's bizarre and they're kind of used to me talking about it, but if there's anyone that's struggling with it, they'll be like, go talk to Lisa. But my thing is, I just want to normalize it and get those grooves out of their head so that they can have the best possible relationship before they're too old, before they're gone. Because they're old now, but they can still do things to give them that youth vitality that they thought they had lost.
Yeah, I love that. Because we die sexual beings, and disabilities and health issues and age do not stop us from being sexual beings.
Yep.
So, which is a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah. We just have to get more creative.
Yes. Yep.
Well, any closing thoughts that you have for anybody who's listening? If there's women out there in particular that are like...
My closing thought is to thank you for all you do in this area, because it is so needed and there's not a lot of resources, and to have you frame it in a way that speaks our language and helps us process through this and open our mind is just beautiful. Thank you. Paul thanks you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's very meaningful. Thanks so much. Well, I thank you for being willing to open up about what I know sometimes are very personal and private matters. And I think you've done a beautiful job today. So thank you for willing to come on and share such a powerful part of your life journey with us.
Thank you.
All right, Lisa. Have a good night.
Okay, you too. Bye.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
A trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary. It's nothing hard.